My name is Mark, and I have always thought of myself as a loyal husband. Emily, my wife, and I had been married for 10 years, and we had two wonderful children. Life was stable, maybe a little too stable. Emily and I had grown comfortable, but the passion we once had seemed to have faded into the routine of daily life. Last summer, Emily's mother, Isabella, invited us to spend a week in Venice. She had rented a beautiful villa by the Grand Canal, hoping to bring some excitement into our lives. Isabella was a striking woman in her late 50s, with a grace and elegance that seemed timeless. Her presence commanded attention, and she had a way of making everyone around her feel special. From the moment we arrived in Venice, I felt an inexplicable tension in the air. Isabella was warm and welcoming, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she greeted us. Her hugs lingered just a little too long, and her touch felt like an electric current. The villa was breathtaking, with its grand rooms, ornate furniture, and stunning views of the canal. Each room was a masterpiece, and it felt like stepping into a different world. Isabella had a room to herself, while Emily, the kids, and I shared a suite. The first evening, Isabella hosted a lavish dinner on the terrace, the air filled with the scent of blooming jasmine and the sound of gondolas gliding by. Isabella was the perfect hostess, effortlessly guiding the conversation and making sure everyone was comfortable. As the night went on, I found myself drawn to her in a way I couldn't explain. She was intoxicating, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. She caught my gaze several times, her lips curling into a knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. That night, as Emily and the kids slept, I lay awake, unable to shake the image of Isabella's smile from my mind. I felt guilty for the thoughts running through my head, but there was something about her that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just a harmless attraction, nothing more. The next day, Isabella suggested we explore the city together. Emily wanted to take the kids to a nearby park, so it ended up being just Isabella and me. We wandered through the narrow streets, admiring the architecture and soaking in the vibrant atmosphere of Venice. Isabella was a captivating guide, her knowledge of the city's history and culture impressive. As we strolled along the canals, she would occasionally brush her hand against mine, the contact sending a thrill through me. At one point, she took my arm and we walked arm in arm like lovers. It felt wrong, but at the same time, it felt so right. We stopped at a quaint cafe for lunch, and as we sipped our wine, Isabella's foot brushed against mine under the table. I looked up to find her staring at me with a smoldering intensity. Her eyes seemed to see right through me, and I felt a surge of desire, unlike anything I had ever experienced. "Mark," she said softly, her voice like velvet, "I've always admired you. You are a wonderful husband and father, but I sense there's something missing in your life." Her words caught me off guard, and I struggled to find a response. I don't know what you mean," I stammered. She leaned in closer, her lips inches from mine. "I think you do," she whispered, her breath warm against my skin. "There's a fire inside you, Mark, and it's been smoldering for too long." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Isabella, this isn't right." She placed a finger on my lips, silencing me. "Shh, don't worry. We're just talking," she said with a sly smile. "But if you ever want to explore that fire, you know where to find me." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I was on edge, every touch, every glance from Isabella setting me ablaze. By the time we returned to the villa, I was a bundle of nerves. I couldn't deny the attraction any longer, but I was terrified of what it could mean. That evening, after another sumptuous dinner, I retreated to the terrace to gather my thoughts. The moonlight danced on the water, creating a magical atmosphere. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Isabella approaching. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" she said, her voice smooth and seductive. "Yes, it is," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She moved closer, her body almost touching mine. "Mark, I want you to know that whatever happens, it stays between us," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. I felt a rush of emotions, a mix of fear, excitement, and desire. "Isabella, I can't." She placed a hand on my chest, the warmth of her touch searing through my shirt. "You can and you will," she said firmly, "but only if you want to." I stood there, my mind racing. I knew I was standing on the edge of a precipice and one wrong move could change everything, but the pull of Isabella was too strong to resist. "Think about it," she said, her voice a sultry whisper, "and when you're ready, come to my room." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the aching desire that had taken hold of me. The night seemed endless as I wrestled with my conscience. torn between my loyalty to Emily and the overwhelming attraction I felt for Isabella. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew that the decision I made would shape the rest of my life. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and all I could think about was the fire that Isabella had ignited within me. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the room. Emily was still asleep beside me, her breathing steady and peaceful. The kids were in their own little world, dreaming of adventures. I lay there, the events of the previous day playing over and over in my mind. Isabella's words had planted a seed, and that seed had taken root. I couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she looked at me, the way her touch felt. I knew it was wrong, but the desire was overwhelming. I needed to see her again, to talk to her, to feel her presence. After breakfast, Emily took the kids to a nearby museum. She asked if I wanted to join them, but I made an excuse about needing some time to myself. She didn't seem to mind, and I felt a pang of guilt as I watched them leave. Once they were gone, I made my way to Isabella's room. My heart pounded with each step, my palms sweaty with anticipation. I reached her door and paused, taking a deep breath before knocking softly. "Come in," her voice called from inside. I opened the door and stepped into her room. She was sitting by the window, dressed in a flowing robe that accentuated her curves. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders in waves. She looked up and smiled, a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Good morning, Mark," she said, her voice warm and inviting. "I was wondering when you'd come." I closed the door behind me and took a step closer. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said last night," I admitted. She stood up and walked towards me, her eyes never leaving mine. "And what did you decide?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, the tension between us palpable. "I don't know," I confessed. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel." She reached out and placed a hand on my cheek, her touch gentle and reassuring. "It's okay to feel conflicted, Mark," she said softly, "but sometimes you have to follow your heart." Her words resonated with me, and before I knew it, I was leaning in, our lips just a breath apart. She closed the gap, her lips pressing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. It was like a dam had broken, and all the emotions I had been holding back came flooding out. Her hands roamed over my body, exploring, caressing, igniting a fire within me. I pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, losing myself in the sensation of her touch. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before, and I knew there was no turning back. We moved to the bed, our bodies entwined, the world outside fading away. Her skin was soft and warm, and I couldn't get enough of her. Every touch, every kiss, every whisper sent waves of pleasure coursing through me. She was a master of seduction, knowing exactly how to drive me wild. Her hands were everywhere, her lips tracing a path of fire across my skin. I was lost in her, consumed by desire, and it felt like nothing else mattered. As we lay there, tangled in each other, she whispered in my ear, "I've wanted this for so long, Mark. You have no idea how much I've craved you." Her words sent a thrill through me, and I responded with a hunger that matched her own. We moved together in perfect harmony, our bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. It was a dance of passion, and every moment was more intense than the last. Hours passed like minutes, and by the time we finally came down from the heights of our passion, we were both exhausted and sated. She lay in my arms, her head resting on my chest, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. But as the euphoria began to fade, reality started to creep back in. I was still married to Emily, still a father to our children. What had just happened was a betrayal, and I knew it would have consequences. Isabella seemed to sense my inner turmoil. She lifted her head and looked at me with a mixture of tenderness and concern. "Mark, I know this is complicated," she said softly, "but sometimes things happen for a reason. Maybe this is a sign that something needs to change." I nodded, unable to find the words to express what I was feeling. I knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. The guilt was starting to weigh on me, and I didn't know how I was going to face Emily. As I lay there, holding Isabella in my arms, I knew that the path I had chosen was fraught with danger, but I also knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. Something had shifted inside me, and there was no turning back. We spent the rest of the day together, talking, laughing, and exploring the depths of our newfound connection. It was as if we were the only two people in the world, and for a while, I allowed myself to forget about everything else. But as the sun began to set, reality came crashing back in. Emily and the kids would be back soon, and I needed to find a way to navigate the complex web of emotions and responsibilities that awaited me. Isabella kissed me one last time before I left her room, her lips lingering on mine, a promise of things to come. "Remember, Mark," she whispered, "this is just the beginning." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. As I made my way back to my room, I couldn't help but wonder how I was going to keep the secret of what had just happened. The fire that Isabella had ignited within me was burning brighter than ever, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. The following days in Venice were a whirlwind of emotions. Emily, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within me, continued to enjoy the vacation with the kids. We visited museums, ate delicious meals, and took gondola rides through the canals. But my thoughts were constantly drifting back to Isabella and the illicit connection we had forged. Every stolen glance, every fleeting touch when no one was looking, only fueled the fire. I became acutely aware of Isabella's presence, her intoxicating perfume, the way her eyes would smolder with unspoken promises whenever she looked at me. It was a dangerous game we were playing, but I was too far gone to care. One afternoon, while Emily and the kids were napping, I found myself wandering through the villa, restless and yearning. I knew where I needed to go, and before I realized it, I was standing outside Isabella's door. I knocked softly, my heart racing. "Come in," her voice called out, sending a shiver down my spine. I stepped inside and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing a simple yet elegant dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She looked up and smiled, a knowing smile that made my pulse quicken. "Mark," she said softly, "I've been waiting for you." I closed the door behind me and walked towards her, unable to resist the magnetic pull between us. "Isabella, I can't stop thinking about you," I confessed, my voice trembling with desire. She stood up and moved closer, her eyes locking onto mine. "I can't stop thinking about you either," she whispered. "Ever since that night, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind." Her words sent a thrill through me, and before I knew it, I was pulling her into my arms, our lips crashing together in a passionate kiss. It was as if all the pent-up desire from the past few days exploded in that moment, and we were lost in each other once again. Our hands roamed over each other's bodies, exploring, caressing, igniting a fire that burned hotter with each passing second. We fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs and desire, our movements urgent and desperate. "Mark," she moaned, her voice a sultry whisper. "I've wanted this for so long." Her words fueled my passion, and I responded with a hunger that matched her own. We moved together in perfect harmony, our bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. It was a dance of passion, and every moment was more intense than the last. As we lay there, tangled in each other, the world outside faded away. It was just the two of us, lost in a sea of desire, and nothing else mattered. But as the euphoria began to fade, reality started to creep back in. The guilt, the fear of being caught, the knowledge that what we were doing was wrong, it all came crashing down. Isabella seemed to sense my inner turmoil. She lifted her head and looked at me with a mixture of tenderness and concern. "Mark, I know this is complicated," she said softly. "But sometimes things happen for a reason. Maybe this is a sign that something needs to change." I nodded, unable to find the words to express what I was feeling. I knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. The guilt was starting to weigh on me, and I didn't know how I was going to face Emily. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, talking, laughing, and exploring the depths of our newfound connection. It was as if we were the only two people in the world, and for a while I allowed myself to forget about everything else. But as the sun began to set, reality came crashing back in. Emily and the kids would be back soon, and I needed to find a way to navigate the complex web of emotions and responsibilities that awaited me. Isabella kissed me one last time before I left her room, her lips lingering on mine, a promise of things to come. "Remember, Mark," she whispered, "this is just the beginning." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. As I made my way back to my room, I couldn't help but wonder how I was going to keep the secret of what had just happened. The fire that Isabella had ignited within me was burning brighter than ever, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. That evening, we all gathered for dinner. The table was set beautifully, the food delicious, but I could barely focus on anything other than Isabella. Every time she spoke, every time she laughed, it was like a siren's call, pulling me deeper into her spell. Emily noticed my distraction and gave me a concerned look. "Are you okay, Mark?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine worry. I forced a smile and nodded. "I'm fine, just a little tired," I lied, hoping she wouldn't see through me. Isabella caught my eye and gave me a reassuring smile, a silent promise that we would find a way to make this work. But as the evening went on, the weight of our secret became almost unbearable. After dinner, Emily suggested we take a walk along the canal. The kids were already asleep, so it was just the two of us. As we strolled through the moonlit streets, hand in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at my conscience. "Mark, is something bothering you?" Emily asked, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "No, just a lot on my mind," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know things have been tough lately, but I love you, and I'm here for you," she said softly. Her words pierced my heart, and I felt a surge of guilt. I loved Emily, but the passion I felt for Isabella was something I couldn't ignore. As we walked back to the villa, I knew I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could change everything. That night, as I lay in bed beside Emily, I couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. The fire she had ignited within me was burning brighter than ever, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and all I could think about was the desire that consumed me. The next few days passed in a blur. Every moment spent with Isabella felt like stolen time, every glance a secret, every touch a forbidden promise. The tension between us grew unbearable, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something had to give. One afternoon, while Emily took the kids out for a boat ride, Isabella suggested we visit the Rialto market. It was the perfect excuse to spend time together, away from prying eyes. As we wandered through the bustling market, the vibrant colors and intoxicating scents filled the air, but all I could focus on was Isabella. We found a quiet corner near the Grand Canal and sat down, the water lapping gently against the stones. Isabella leaned in close, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Mark, I can't keep pretending that nothing is happening between us," she said softly. "We need to talk about this." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I know," I replied, "but what are we going to do?" She reached out and took my hand, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. "We can't ignore our feelings, Mark. This isn't just a fling. There's something real here, something we can't deny." I looked into her eyes, feeling the truth of her words. "But what about Emily? What about the kids?" I asked, my voice filled with anguish. Isabella sighed, her expression pained. "I don't have all the answers, but I know that living a lie isn't fair to anyone. We need to find a way to be honest, even if it means making some difficult decisions." Her words hung heavy in the air, and I knew she was right. But the thought of hurting Emily, of breaking up our family, was almost too much to bear. I needed time to think, to figure out what I really wanted. That evening back at the villa, I tried to act normal, but the weight of our secret was suffocating. Emily noticed my distraction and tried to talk to me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. The guilt was eating me alive, and I felt like I was being torn apart. After dinner, Isabella pulled me aside. "Meet me in my room later," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "We need to talk." I nodded, my heart racing. As the night wore on, I could barely concentrate on anything else. I waited until Emily and the kids were asleep before slipping out of our room and making my way to Isabella's. When I entered her room, she was standing by the window, the moonlight casting a soft glow over her. She turned to face me, her expression serious. "Mark, we can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to make a decision." I took a deep breath, my heart heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. "I know," I replied, "but I don't know what to do. I love Emily, but the passion I feel for you is something I can't ignore." She walked over to me, her eyes filled with a mix of desire and sadness. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "But we can't keep living a lie. We need to be honest, with ourselves and with the people we care about." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I knew she was right. But the thought of losing either of them was unbearable. I felt trapped, torn between my love for Emily and my desire for Isabella. Before I could say anything, Isabella stepped closer, her hand sliding up my chest. "Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with longing, "no matter what happens, I want you to know that I care about you deeply." but we need to be brave and face the truth." Her words ignited a fire within me, and I pulled her into a passionate kiss. Our bodies pressed together, and it felt like the world outside disappeared. The intensity of our connection was overwhelming, and I knew that this was the moment of truth. We moved to the bed, our clothes falling away as we gave in to our desire. Every touch, every kiss, every whisper was filled with an urgency that bordered on desperation. It was as if we were trying to hold on to something that was slipping through our fingers. As we lay there, spent and breathless, the reality of our situation came crashing down. I knew that what we had done couldn't be undone, and the choices we made from here on out would shape the rest of our lives. Isabella looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Mark, we need to talk to Emily," she said softly. "We can't keep pretending that everything is okay." I nodded, my heart heavy with dread. "I know," I replied, "but how do we even begin to explain this?" She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and comforting. "We'll figure it out together," she said, "but we need to be honest. It's the only way." The next morning I woke up early, the weight of our secret pressing down on me. Emily stirred beside me, her face peaceful and serene. I felt a surge of guilt and sorrow, knowing that I was about to shatter her world. I got up quietly and went to the terrace, needing some time to think. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the city. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Isabella. She came over and stood beside me, her presence a comforting balm to my troubled mind. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. Together we went back inside, where Emily was just waking up. She looked at us with a sleepy smile, unaware of the storm that was about to break. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Emily," I began, my voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." Emily looked up, her eyes wide with concern. "Mark, what is it?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Emily, there's something you need to know. It's about me and Isabella," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes flicked between me and Isabella, confusion turning to realization. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. I glanced at Isabella, who nodded slightly, encouraging me to continue. "Emily, Isabella and I, we've been involved," I said, my voice breaking. "It started here in Venice, and it's been tearing me apart inside." Emily's face went pale, her eyes filling with tears. "You and my mother?" she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. "How could you do this to me, to our family?" Tears streamed down her face as she backed away from me, her hands trembling. I reached out to her, but she recoiled, the hurt and betrayal evident in her eyes. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen," I said, my voice choked with emotion. Isabella stepped forward, her expression filled with regret. "Emily, I know this is hard to understand, but please believe me when I say that I never wanted to hurt you. This wasn't planned, it just happened," she said softly. Emily's gaze shifted to Isabella, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You were supposed to be my mother, someone I could trust," she said, her voice breaking. "How could you betray me like this?" Isabella's eyes welled with tears as she reached out to Emily. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but please understand that we never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. Emily shook her head, her face a mask of anguish. "I can't do this. I can't stay here and pretend that everything is okay," she said, her voice raw with pain. She turned and ran out of the room, leaving me and Isabella standing there, the weight of our actions hanging heavy in the air. I felt a crushing sense of guilt and sorrow as I watched her go, knowing that I had shattered her world. Isabella reached out to me, her touch gentle and reassuring. "We'll get through this, Mark," she said softly, "but we need to give her time." The next few days were a blur of tension and heartache. Emily avoided both of us, spending most of her time with the kids or out exploring the city on her own. The once joyous atmosphere of the villa had turned heavy with sadness and regret. One evening as the sun was setting, I found Emily sitting by the canal, staring out at the water. I approached her slowly, unsure if she would even want to see me. "Emily," I said softly, sitting down beside her, "can we talk?" She didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "What is there to say, Mark? You've broken my heart," she said, her voice hollow. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Emily, I know I've hurt you more than I can ever say. I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you and I love our family. But somewhere along the way I lost myself, I said, my voice filled with remorse. She finally turned to look at me, her eyes filled with tears. How could you, Mark? How could you do this to us? She asked, her voice breaking. I felt a surge of guilt and sorrow as I reached out to her. I don't have a good answer, Emily. All I can say is that I'm sorry, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. But I understand if you can't forgive me, I said, my voice choked with emotion. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Mark. But for the sake of our children, we need to find a way to move forward, she said softly. Her words filled me with a glimmer of hope, but I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes, I said, my voice filled with determination. As the days passed, we began to talk more, slowly trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments of anger, hurt, and tears. But through it all, I could see a small glimmer of hope. Isabella decided to leave Venice early, giving us the space we needed to heal. Her departure was bittersweet, filled with a mix of regret and understanding. Take care of her, Mark, she said softly as she hugged me goodbye. And take care of yourself. I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of our shared secret. Thank you, Isabella, for everything, I said, my voice filled with emotion. As she left, I turned back to Emily, who was watching from a distance. We'll get through this, Emily, I said softly, taking her hand, one step at a time. She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. I hope so, Mark. I really do, she said, her voice trembling. The rest of our time in Venice was spent trying to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments of doubt and pain. But slowly, we began to find a way forward, holding on to the hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. As we prepared to leave the villa and return home, I felt a sense of resolve. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was determined to make things right, to prove to Emily that our love was worth fighting for. The fire that had been ignited within me by Isabella still burned, but it was tempered by the understanding of the consequences of my actions. I knew that the path to redemption would be fraught with challenges, but I was ready to face them, one step at a time. Returning home from Venice felt surreal. The familiar surroundings of our house seemed to have changed, tainted by the memories and emotions we had brought back with us. Emily and I moved through our routines with a fragile sense of normalcy, but the tension between us was palpable. Days turned into weeks, and we slowly started to navigate the rocky terrain of our new reality. The children sensed that something was wrong, but we did our best to shield them from the turmoil. Emily and I continued our difficult conversations, trying to find a way to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Emily and I sat down in the living room. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words and lingering pain. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Mark, I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said softly, her eyes fixed on her hands. About us, about everything that's happened. I nodded, my heart pounding. I've been thinking too, I replied. I want to make things right, Emily. I want to be the husband and father you deserve. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. I believe you, Mark. But it's going to take time, a lot of time, she said, her voice trembling. We need to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. I reached out and took her hand, my touch gentle and reassuring. I understand, Emily. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, I said, my voice filled with sincerity. She squeezed my hand, a small sign of the connection we were trying to rebuild. We need to be honest with each other no matter how hard it is, she said. And we need to see a counselor. We can't do this alone. I nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. I think that's a good idea. We need all the help we can get, I said, my voice steady. The next few months were a blur of therapy sessions, heart-to-heart conversations, and small steps towards healing. Our counselor helped us navigate the complex emotions and lingering pain, guiding us through the process of rebuilding our relationship. Emily and I worked hard to reconnect, finding moments of joy and tenderness amidst the difficult times. We rediscovered the things that had brought us together in the first place, and slowly, the trust between us began to grow. One afternoon, as we were sitting in the garden watching the kids play, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and determination. Mark, I want you to know that I'm starting to see the man I fell in love with again, she said softly. I can see how hard you're trying, and it means a lot to me. Her words filled me with a sense of hope and gratitude. Thank you, Emily. I'm not perfect, but I'm committed to being the best husband and father I can be, I said, my voice filled with emotion. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I know, Mark, and I'm willing to give us a chance. A real chance, she said, her voice steady. As the months passed, our relationship continued to heal. There were still moments of doubt and pain, but we faced them together, determined to overcome the challenges that lay ahead. We took things one day at a time, focusing on the small victories and the progress we were making. Isabella remained a presence in our lives, though our interactions were limited and carefully managed. She respected our need for space and time, and our conversations were cordial but distant. The connection we had shared in Venice was a memory, a lesson in the complexities of human emotions and the consequences of our actions. One evening, as Emily and I were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a sense of peace. Mark, I think we're going to be okay, she said softly. We've come a long way and I believe in us. I looked at her, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. I believe in us too, Emily. We've faced so much, but we're still here, still fighting for each other, I said, my voice filled with conviction. She smiled, a smile that warmed my heart. I love you, Mark, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I love you too, Emily, I replied, my voice steady. And I always will. As we sat there, holding hands and watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of hope and renewal. The path we had traveled had been fraught with pain and heartache, but it had also brought us closer together, forging a bond that was stronger than ever. The fire that Isabella had ignited within me had been transformed into a different kind of passion, a passion for healing, for redemption, and for the love that Emily and I shared. Our journey was far from over, but I knew that together, we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, with the past behind us and the future stretching out before us, we embraced the promise of a new beginning, determined to build a life filled with love, trust, and unwavering commitment to each other and our family.